Hello, my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/EntitledPeople, where people truly believe that the world revolves around them and nobody else matters. And in today's episode, it's all about Karens causing trouble in hospitals, guys. And OP tells a story about the time he watched a Karen throw a tantrum in the ER, and it was the worst mistake of her life. Guys, I hope you enjoy the stories. Don't shake your heads too hard. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. When my youngest son was little, he spent a lot of time in the hospitals. Too much. When my son was going through any type of painful procedure, he had a dancing clown that played soft music that he concentrated on to help stop the panic and help the pain. It was a very adorable clown. When he was 6 years old, he had to have a major surgery, like life or death type surgery. My son was so sick, so of course, the clown was with us. With my son being in pain, I had that clown going 24/7. The child in the room next to us was going through chemo. Unfortunately, she wasn't handling it well physically. She would cry all night long. So around 11 p.m. on the third night, my son woke up to the girl's cries. I go start the clown and he stops me. He then asked me to give his clown to the baby crying. Since my son was drugged up, I asked him if he was sure, as he was going to need it. He then told me that she needs it more than him because she can't stop crying. And yes, that was a proud mama moment. So I go next door with the clown and I peek in to see if anyone's awake. Both the mom and the child are. I knocked, explained why I was intruding, and then start up the clown and hand him over. And like me, the mother kept that clown going almost continuously. It did soothe her crying child. 2 days later, the mother stopped by our room, and she asked if she could use the clown again. We didn't have it, so I went to the nurse's station and explained the clown was given to the girl and it's now gone, and I wanted it found right now. They searched all day for it, and it was eventually found and given back to the girl. We then found out that one of the nurse's aides had taken it for her child, because in her words, well, that girl wasn't going to need it much longer, and my daughter loves clowns. Now, I don't know if she got fired, but I didn't see her again. So yeah, the post ends right there, guys, but what a horrible nurse's aide, right? And I'm hoping she lost her job, or at the very least, got reprimanded for her actions, because you know if she's taking things from patients, that might not be the first time. And seriously, you'd think that being in the medical field, where your job is to help others, there's no way that someone can do that to a patient, right? Let alone a sick child. But the comment section is flooded with people sharing their stories, from people laying there unconscious and having $50 stolen from their purses, to old people with dementia getting jewelry stolen off their hands and necks. My goodness, some nurses, right? And with that said though, I really hope that when the nurse's aide said that that little girl wouldn't need it much longer, she was referring to the girl getting discharged and going home, because if she took the clown for the other reason, there's a special place in the deepest, darkest hole on earth for her. That's all I'm saying. First off, I was a bystander watching this unfold in front of me. The day this happened, I was sitting in the waiting room in the ER. There was a young girl about 10 years old by her looks. The girl was totally bald and she didn't hide it. Overhearing her mom, I come to find out that she has cancer and she was getting ready for a chemo treatment. Now, at this hospital, they have service dogs meant to calm kids down when they get scared. The dog they let her take care of was only a small dog. I have no idea what breed. The girl was on the gurney, waiting her turn, happily petting the dog. And this is where Karen joins the story. Karen's a bigger woman, which is relevant to the story. She walks up right to the counter with her daughter who's crying. I can hear the woman tell the nurse that her daughter fell off the swing set and she got a black eye. She was then told to take a seat and wait until called. As she was walking to sit down, her daughter spots the dog and she squeals as she wants to pet the puppy. This is when the young girl's mom tried to explain that the dog was a special dog, and that her daughter was taking care of him, and he was taking care of her, and to please not touch the dog. Well, Karen, hearing this, did not like it one bit, and she starts yelling, "My girl wants to pet the mutt, so she is going to pet the mutt." She then puts her hands on her hips like she'd already won the fight. Again, she was told no, for obvious reasons, and that's when Karen went to go grab the dog. But here's the thing. She reaches over the young girl's mom to take the dog, but being a bigger woman, I guess she leaned over a little bit too far. Karen lost her balance, landing her mom directly on her daughter, pulling the IV out of this girl's arm. Now, I'm not sure if anyone landed on the dog, but it yelped really loud, so I assume she did. Now, at this hospital, they don't just have security, but there's also a police officer stationed there as well. Both security and the cop just grabs the woman instantly, pinning her to the floor hard. Within seconds, she was handcuffed and hauled into the security room. The whole time, she's screaming for them to let go as her daughter needs her. Her daughter was taken to a quiet room with a nice nurse, while the other nurses worked on getting the poor girl hooked back up to everything. The poor little dog was so scared that he was useless to the girl. Luckily, they have more than one dog on site at all times. This time, they brought her a German Shepherd. After I was seen and on my way out, I see one of the security guys, and I asked him how things ended since I was seeing the doctor. He just laughed, and he said that Karen got trespassed from the hospital, and she was also charged with resisting arrest, assault on the cop, interfering with a service animal while on duty, and assault on the young girl and her mother. If there was more, I can't remember. I just wish I was there when they took her out screaming and kicking. Well, that went from 0 to 100 real quick, didn't it? And seriously, the woman didn't just mess up. She messed up pretty badly by the sound of it, with all those charges she got. I just don't get how some people can't just tell their kids no, like they need to practice it. No, you can't pet this stranger's dog. We're in a hospital, not a public park. The dog is working. Like that's all the woman had to say. But no, the woman had to reach for the dog, lose her balance, fall onto the mom and the girl and the poor dog, which then ends with the IV getting ripped out of the girl's arm. My goodness, like it makes me so mad when people do stuff like this, injuring others in the process of trying to get what they want. I just hope Karen learned a lesson that day because that sounds like a very, very, very expensive black eye. So this goes back 28 years when I became a mother for the first time. I delivered a healthy baby boy, and promptly 24 hours later, the hospital releases us. Off I went, in complete happiness with my new bundle of joy. My mom came home with my husband and I to help for the first week. Within a few days, it became apparent that my son was turning a horrid shade of yellow. My mom assured me that it was most likely jaundice and that he would probably need extra sunlight. So we take him to the pediatrician, who felt he would be better off in the hospital under some blue lights. The doctor's instructions were very specific. He said to me, "Mom, I want you to go right to the hospital. You will be sleeping at the hospital the next several nights. I'm calling ahead, so they have everything set up for you. And since you're breastfeeding, I want you to feed him as much as he'll take, every 2 hours. The rest of the time, sleep as much as possible. So go get him settled in, feed him, and then go pack a bag and come back." He then hugged me because he'd been my doctor since I was 13, and he had delivered my first baby, and he was my baby's doctor too. Our entire family adored this man, and we trusted him completely. The hospital was across the street, and I was ready to cry. I felt like maybe I'd done something wrong, or my baby would not be in this predicament. I was breastfeeding, but it was a struggle, and I just felt like a failure. I also do not do well with confrontation, so combine that with the hormones raging through my body, and I was a mess. So I arrive at the hospital, and they usher us upstairs. I had just been discharged a few days before, and a few nurses recognized me. I approached the counter, where I encountered Nurse Karen for the first time. The woman was in her mid-60s, I would guess. She then looks up from her paperwork as if I'm bothering her. She then says, "May I help you?" To which I say, yes. The doctor asked me to come in. He said he called ahead, and I then explained the whole story, including the explicit instructions for breastfeeding. As soon as I finish, she looked at me over her glasses and she sighed a little. She then says to me, "I've been doing this a long time, and what your baby needs are the blue lights and formula. You don't have good enough breast milk or he wouldn't be in this situation. So let's get him checked in and then you can go home. We'll call you when he's ready to be picked up." What followed was dead silence. The urge to cry was rising up inside of me like a surging volcano about to erupt. I began to cry, as I was not one to buck an authority figure back then. Somehow, I found my voice, and I said, "My doctor said I'm to stay here and breastfeed my son every 2 hours. He is not to have formula. We want to breastfeed him and only breastfeed him." My mom and husband were looking at me like they couldn't believe I'd spoken up. My mom later told me that she was about to go off on that nurse, but I spoke up. Well, Nurse Karen seemed quite offended that I dare speak to her in that manner. She replies rather rudely, "Fine, you can go feed him back here." And then she led me to the nursery. It was divided into 2 sections, and one section was closed. It was full of extra newborn cribs, folding chairs, and equipment not in use. It was cold and dark. Karen then pulls out a folding chair, looked at me, and then said, "You have exactly 20 minutes to feed him, and then get out." She stormed out after she said that. Well, that did it. Now I was being timed when I was barely learning how to feed my baby. My baby was sick, and I had to feed him in a cold, dark room on a folding chair when I'd been using a pillow and a comfortable chair. I was despondent and began to cry. All I could do was hold my baby and just cry and cry and cry. I didn't even feed him. He was sleeping soundly while I just bawled my eyes out. I just waited there until far after my time was up because I thought Nurse Karen was coming back for me. A little bit later, a nurse comes in and I startle the hell out of her. The nice nurse said, "Oh, honey, what are you doing in here?" So I explained the entire story again, and I'm sobbing at this point. The nurse came over and hugged me, and she said, honey, I do not know what that nurse was thinking, but this is not at all how we do things. Come with me, let's get you all set up." So I follow her, and for the first time, I felt like there was a light at the end of the tunnel. The baby was beginning to get hungry, so I held my head in shame and I told her I'd not been able to feed the baby in the 20 minutes I was allowed. And was there please someplace I could sit down and do that now? The nice nurse was the most precious human being on the planet, next to my newborn son at that moment. She then takes me to a room reserved for parents and babies who might stay in the hospital. It was a private room, and she brought me sheets and pillows for the fold-out couch. She brought me their professional breast pump machine, and she set me up with a professional pumping kit. I was able to feed my son, get him under the blue lights, and then head home for a quick pack of clothing, and then return in time for his next feeding. We returned a little more than an hour later. I walk in, looking for my baby, and he's not under the blue lights. I did a little more searching, and that's when I find Nurse Karen with my son in her arms, and she was feeding him a bottle of, you guessed it, formula. The mama bear in me just reared her protective head, and I lost my lid. I knocked on the glass furiously until she looked up, and that woman had the nerve to roll her eyes at me. She then comes out and she asked what I needed. I say to her, I explained to you that we are strictly breastfeeding our baby. We do not want him to have formula. I will take him now for his feeding. And that's when Nurse Karen had the audacity to say this. She says to me, what you don't understand is formula is better. He needs to rid his body of bilirubins, and the formula will bind to it better than breast milk. If you breastfeed, he's just gonna be here longer. Is that what you want? For your baby to be in the hospital longer? I know what I'm doing. I then say to her, my doctor said I'm to breastfeed only. I will take my baby now. Nurse Karen just rolls her eyes and she says, fine, suit yourself. She then plopped him in my arms and I went off to my private room to breastfeed my son. That was my life for 3 nights and 4 days. The nurses would wake me at night every 2 hours and I would feed, then sleep. On day number 4, he was a bright, pink, healthy baby, and we got to take him home. My husband called our doctor, and he told him what the nurse had done. On the second day, he came to check on us, and I later had the pleasure of witnessing my doctor giving Nurse Karen a good mouthful of what he thought of her. He was furious, and she got chewed out real good. She was told to no longer have anything to do with our family. With that said, 2 years after my son was born, I gave birth to my daughter in the same hospital. Upon arrival in labor and delivery, Nurse Karen was once again on duty. The nurse who checked us in was wonderful. I then pointed to Nurse Karen and I said, you see that woman right there? I didn't call her a nurse. We do not want that woman anywhere near our new baby that's on the way. She was a nightmare 2 years ago, and I will not be stressed out or bullied by her again. The nurse checking us in just smiles at me, a great big smile, and she said, I absolutely understand, and you will not have to worry about her at all. We never laid eyes on her again. But unfortunately, I've never forgotten her. The woman could have been nice, she could have been kind, she could have been understanding, she could have followed doctor's orders, but apparently her vast experience as a nurse made her more knowledgeable and more entitled about what's best for my baby. And here's a funny side note, we referred to my baby as our Kmart Blue Light Special after that. Honestly, I'm really surprised that Nurse Karen still had a job when OP came back, right? Like, in my opinion, OP should have totally escalated things and spoken to her superior because it was not her decision to make. Like, I don't know what it was like 3 decades ago, but nowadays, I don't think that Nurse Karen would be able to do something like that. At least, not without losing her job or even facing a lawsuit. And I also want to add that the way Karen spoke to OP and the attitude she gave her made me so angry, guys. Sit in this dark room, you've got 20 minutes to feed your baby and get out. Like, that is no way for a medical professional to be speaking to a patient. And seriously, I wonder how many mama bears gave Karen a good smack over the years. Or at the very least, a good tongue lashing for acting like that. So I just got out of the hospital for extensive knee surgery, and walking out the door of the hospital reminded me of this story. Here's a few important things to note. Number 1, I have a very severe allergy to cashews. It's bad enough that even 1/100th of one will kill me if I'm not treated properly and quickly. Nowadays, I always make sure to have an EpiPen on me at all times, but when this story took place, I was a little more forgetful about it. Number 2, I have asthma, which can be a pretty lousy combination with anaphylaxis. Number 3, at the time of the story, my dad was working for a company that treats him like garbage and wouldn't give him time off for anything except medical emergencies, pretty much. And number 4, this story starts 4 days before my 10th birthday. So here's the story. A week before my birthday, my dad's boss told him that he was going to San Francisco for work stuff. We lived in Denver at the time, which meant that my dad was gonna miss my birthday. It was pretty upsetting, but I understood, and he said we'd have a party once he got back. While he was gone, my brother and I were staying with my mom, as they were divorced. On day number 3 of my dad's trip, my brother and I were playing in the living room when mom offers us some granola bars as a snack. At the time, I was young, and I wasn't very cautious, so I didn't always read ingredients for things I was eating. Unfortunately, there were cashews in the granola bar, so when I took the first bite, I start to feel it pretty quickly after. Within minutes, I was throwing up everywhere. I was in severe pain and my throat was closing up. It just gets worse after that because that's when I realized I'd forgotten my EpiPen. And then, to make things even worse, the panic and closing airways triggers an asthma attack, and I didn't have my inhaler. So at that point, my mom's boyfriend calls an ambulance and I pass out on the floor. The paramedics were able to keep me from dying of the combination of anaphylactic shock and asthma attack, but I did end up slipping into a coma for 11 days. This meant that I was in a coma on my birthday. So a week after my birthday, I finally wake up. At first, I was pretty calm about waking up in a hospital, until I found out that I was in a coma for 11 days, at which point I start panicking and almost gave myself another asthma attack. Anyways, they kept me there for a few more days, just to make sure I was okay, and it was safe for me to go home. So we finally get home, and as soon as I walk in, I see my brother, my grandparents, my aunt, my uncle, my 2 cousins, my mom, and the neighbor mom, as well as a big sign that reads, "Happy Birthday, and welcome back to the land of the living." They had planned a surprise birthday party for me once they found out I was out of the coma. So we went about doing the birthday party things and hanging out, while neighbor mom bakes my cake. However, the only important thing that was happening at this time was the following conversation that my mom had with the neighbor mom. The neighbor mom says, "Man, that must have been terrifying for him to go into that coma. I mean, imagine having to be that careful about everything you eat." My mom says, "Oh, don't tell me you buy all that." To which she says, "What?" My mom then says, "He was clearly faking it to get attention. Everybody knows that asthma and allergies aren't real." Neighbor mom says, "Both of those are very real and they're very serious problems." To which my mom says, "Whatever, I'm just saying that people are sheep and they're too stupid to see through the government's lies." She then wanders off. And I feel it's important to note at this time that the birthday cake had just been put in the oven, and this conversation happened in the living room, which did not have a line of sight to the kitchen. After a while, the cake finally finishes baking, and we all gather in the dining room to eat it. Everyone then sang happy birthday to me, and my aunt cuts the cake and gave everyone a slice. I was about to take the first bite when the luckiest thing that could have happened happened. I dropped my fork on the floor. At this point, wanting to act all grown up and solve my own problems, I decide to go to the kitchen and clean the fork myself. Well, right as I finish and I start walking back to the dining room, I hear my dad yell, "What the F did you just say?" I run out to see what's going on, and my dad's standing up, staring daggers at my mom, while she just cowered in fear of him. My mom then whimpers and says it was for his own good. Well, it turns out that after the conversation between my mom and the neighbor mom, my mom had snuck into the kitchen and she poured a bag of mixed nuts that she'd brought with her into the cake. My dad then slams his hand on the table and he says, "How the F is that for his own good?" My mom starts to gain some confidence as she doesn't see a problem with what's happening. And she says to my dad, well, if he had eaten the cake without knowing they were in there, he wouldn't be able to fake a reaction because he wouldn't have known there was anything in the cake to react to. To which my dad responds with, "What the actual F is wrong with you?" She then says, "I was trying to prove to you sheeple that allergies aren't..." It's at this point, my dad then screams for all the kids to go outside, and we run to the backyard. My dad then let my mom have it. We were outside, but we could still hear the screaming through the windows as my dad just lost it. He said, "I knew inviting you here was a mistake. I figured it was good for the boys to have you in their lives, but you've made it abundantly clear that it's not. What is wrong with you? Get the F out of my house and stay the F away from my kids." My mom began crying and she said, "You can't do that, they're my kids too." Dad just says, "Not after what you pulled, they're not. And if you want to take this to court, I'll make sure you're not even allowed in the same state as them. Now get out of my house before I call the cops." My mom's last words to my dad were, "You just wait until my dad hears about this." Now, a thing about my mom's side of the family is that her dad is very wealthy, so I think she was expecting him to help her get custody of my brother and me. We found out later that not only did her boyfriend break up with her and kick her out of his house, but when her dad found out what she did, he refused to let her live with him. He even said that if she took my dad to court, he would support my dad. As you can expect, she never took us to court. And as for the rest of the party, we just bought a new cake because nobody wanted to take the time to bake another one. We also decided to throw out the pan we had used for the first one because my mom had put so many nuts in it that we were actually worried about it contaminating anything we put in it after that. Holy moly, some people are just out of their minds, aren't they? And you would think that as a mom, she would have been extra careful after her son had the first allergic reaction and was in a coma for 11 days. But no, that woman did not care in the world if her son just went right back to the hospital, and that's frickin' terrifying. All because she thought he was faking. Like, yeah, maybe people can fake an allergic reaction, Karen, but I'm pretty sure you can't fake being in a coma for 11 days in a hospital. And one more thing, I'm also glad that her rich dad had a good head on his shoulders to know that his own daughter's a little bit nutso. And that's putting it nicely. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of our /Entitled People. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/malicious compliance episode, where bad bosses are getting taught lessons they won't forget. Guys, go check it out if you haven't. And myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.